Hi, I'm Ashley from Sunny Made, and today we are on week 2 of our Sunny Stars quilt. Welcome back, friends. How did week 1 go? Did you get all your pieces cut out? Are you ready to go for this week? If you're not, that's okay, because you can definitely play catch up. I don't want you to feel like you have to stay on top of it. Okay, so last week we should have read through our whole quilt pattern and then cut out our pieces. Okay, we are going to start with A and B of our low volume squares and background fabric, and our D and E. Actually, I have those backwards. So A and B and D and E of our prints that we cut out last week. Okay, we also are going to need a writing utensil because we're going to be drawing lines on our fabric. You need to make sure your iron is nice and hot. Thread in your sewing machine, and let's get started. Okay, so we are going to be on page 4 of our quilt pattern, Scrappy Star. We're going to do this center star of our quilt. First, we're going to start by making the points of our quilt. I like to start with the sewing that needs to get done. We're going to make a whole bunch of these. We're going to do them all at one time. I will show you the easiest way to do that. Then we're going to cut them and iron them, and we are going to trim them, and we're going to kind of just do this assembly line thing where we're doing one step at a time to all the pieces, then move on to the next step. That's kind of how I like to put together my quilts when there is a repeating pattern like it is in this one. It's time for us to put together our Scrappy center star, and it's going to break down 8 steps on how to create this. And at the end, you want to have 8 or 12 of them. So first we did, using B and D, to make 2 half squared triangles using the 2 at a time method. So that's what we're going to do first. 2, place right sides together, draw a line corner to corner, one direction diagonally. Sew along each side of the line. 3, cut down center line, press towards darker fabric. 4, trim to 2.5 inch squares, and you need 8 of those for each star, which means 8 times 12, you're going to end up with 48 half square triangles that are 2.5 inches. So first we're going to start with 2 at a time half square triangles. So you're going to need, put aside the 2.5 inch squares. That is going to be A and E. Okay, so you should have 3.5 inch, let me make sure that that's the right size, 3 inches of our low volume and background, and you have 3 inches of our pattern fabric. What we're going to do first is make 2 at a time half square triangles. I'm just going to pull this over because this gives me a little harder surface than just my ironing board. And what we're just going to do is you're going to take one from your pattern, okay, with fabric side up, right side up, and then you're just going to take a low volume or background square, place it right on top of it. If it does happen to have a pattern, we're putting right sides together. We are then going to, oh, I just realized I need a straight edge. Hold on one second. Got it. Okay, now that our pieces are stacked, we are going to lay our ruler diagonally across the line from corner to corner. And we're going to draw a line from corner to corner. And then I'm going to set this set aside. Now, if you want to, you are more than welcome to pin these. If they were bigger squares starting out with, I probably would pin them, but because these are kind of small, I'm just going to draw the line and I'm going to set them over in a pile. I'm then going to go on to my next piece, get the background, the low volume, put it on top of it, and then I'm going to draw that diagonal line corner to corner and then stack it on top. Now, I like to stack mine this way, where one goes one point, it's more like a diamond, and then I lay the next one on top of it like it's a square. And the reason is it's just easier to separate when I'm at the sewing machine. And I lay them all the same way. As you can see, the line goes vertical, so I'm going to make sure that when they're the diamond, the line goes vertical, and when they look like a square, the line is going to go top left to bottom right. And I just find that easier as I'm at the sewing machine. So what we're going to do is pair up our 3-inch squares of our letter D with our 3-inch squares of letter B, and we are going to draw that diagonal and stack them. Okay, we have our stack of squares. Their lines are drawn on them. They are all ready to go. What I'm going to do is take my stack over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew them. So since these are 2 at a time, half square triangles, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch down one side, 1/4 inch down the other. There's a couple of ways to do that at your sewing machine. You can do just 1 at a time, and that's okay. 1, turn it around, flip it, sew down the other side. I like to chain piece, which means I'm going to put 1 at a time and it's going to go down one side of my line, and then I'm going to put the next one in and it's going to go down that same line until I have fed all of these through and it's going down one side of the line. I'm then going to flip the whole thing over because they're all going to be connected and sew down the other side. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, now that we have our half square triangles all put together, it is time to make that 4 patch in the middle. We are looking for our E. They're 2.5 inch squares, letter E pieces. What we're going to do is we're going to take 4 of them, lay them in 2x2 pattern. Get that one out of the way. A little extra, okay? Fold them over, sew them, iron them, put them back together, sew them again. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now it's time to work on our 4 patch. So we're going to take 4E and create a 4 patch nesting the seam. So I'm just going to walk you through that real quick. I have my 4 letter E's laid out, fold them over this way, and we're going to start by sewing right down that edge. When you're making your 4 patch, in order to nest the seams, we want to make sure that one set of seams is going this way and one is going this way, which is exactly what I did here. Then when I fold it over, I line up those seams, make sure they nest all nice and pretty, and then I'm going to sew right down that edge and iron open. When you have your 4 squares put together, this should measure 4.5 by 4.5. So I'm just going to grab my square, check it. I'm going to put 2.25 vertical, 2.25 horizontal on there. And it's really similar. It looks like I might have a little peach there sticking out. So I'm just going to flip it around because it's easier for me to trim from this direction. I'm going to line up that vertical seam and that horizontal seam, grab my rotary cutter, and trim it. And I think that was the only spot that it was not, that was sticking out a little too far. So now that we have our 4-patch, the next step is going to be to create the star part of it. So we created the 4-patch in step 5, and now it's time to lay it out. We need 8 half square triangles, and we need 4 of our letter A corner pieces. These are going to end up in corner pieces. So first we'll take our half square triangles that have been trimmed to 2.5 inches. We're going to take them and lay them out in our quilt for our star. And then I'm going to switch these around a tad bit. I try not to be too particular, but I find that I'm a little particular sometimes. So I just try to make sure we don't have matching colors and matching designs on the fabric. And then I'm going to put a letter A in each of the corners. And this is our Scrappy star and what it's going to look like. Whoops. Let's get you out. There we go. First, what I want to do is I want to fold over and create these points of the star together. Now, if I'm very careful, once I have them sewn and I pay attention to the direction my center seams are going on my 4-patch, I can iron them towards the color, the opposite. So this one, I want to make sure that the seams are going this way, where this one, I want the seams going this way. This seam, I want to go down this one, and this seam, I want to go up that one. So take your half square triangles over to the sewing machine, sew them down that center line, and then iron them open. I have my half square triangles sewn together. I have them all ironed in the right direction so they'll nest nicely when I start to put this together. And now we're just going to sew this into rows. I'm going to start by flipping this one over, and this one over. And so right down each edge, I'm going to iron the top and the bottom towards the corner pieces and the middle one towards that middle 4-patch. The first tip that I want to give you is lining up these seams here. When I flip over, I want to be able to nest these center seams with that point there in the middle. If I have done it correctly, I have one seam going this direction and one seaming go the opposite direction. That way, when you put them like this, you can see that one goes one way and one goes the other, and it's not going to be too bulky. I'm then going to take my pin and stick it right there in that seam. And if I pull it back, it should be on the seam right below it. And then I'm just going to pull it and put that seam in place so it doesn't move. What this does is it lines up this seam with the seam below it and nests them beautifully. As I run it through my sewing machine, I will then pull out my pin right as my foot gets to that part. So the next step on this will be to fold these ones over and sew them all in a line. Now I mentioned which direction we're going to be ironing our fabric towards. My next tip is, if you want your fabric to be ironed towards the corner, you're going to put the corner up, iron it to set that seam, fold it back with the finger press, and then iron it again. And it's going to fold your fabric back towards that corner piece. Now this one was the opposite. we wanted the 4 patch up, set that seam, fold it back, and set the end, iron it once again. So now that we have these 3 all lined up, we're going to take them to the sewing machine and sew right down them, press towards the corners on the top and the bottom, and towards the 8 patch there in the middle. To finish up our quilt block, we are just going to fold this one over, line up our seams here, here, and here, then fold this one over, and line up our seams in those same spots, and iron it open. Now that our star is made, we are going to give it a quick trim to make sure that it is the right size for the center. So it should be 8.5 by 8.5. This is an 8.5 inch square. So I'm going to line up that center at 4 1/4, horizontal and vertical. This one, you know, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of seams, so it doesn't quite sit flat. So make sure that as you put it on, you line it up and you work really hard and not letting it move. So I'm going to line it up. I'm going to get a trim side and top. Okay, so yeah, there's a little bit there that I trimmed off. I'm going to flip it around, line it up with the side and the bottom. It should still line up there in the center at 4 1/4. Whoops, see, that actually is moving. Okay, line that up. Then we're going to go do side and top. And we have our first center star. What I did when I was working with the half square triangles here is I divided them up into 12 different piles. They just look like this, gave them a trim. They're all 2.5 inches, and they're all divided up so that they don't have the same, any of the points are the same fabric. So I have these now all piled up. I have my 4 patches. I just need to make sure that they're trimmed to 4.5 inches, and then I have my corner pieces. So take all that you have now, put them together into this beautiful quilt block. Let's go back to the instructions to see what it says. 4 patch, lay out the star, sew rows together, press top and bottom towards the corner squares, and center row towards the 4 patch, and 8, sew rows together, press and trim to 8.5 by 8.5. Make 12. When you are done with this week's sewing, you should have 12 of these that are all trimmed to 8.5 inches. Now, I have some other videos that show you how to trim if you don't have the exact size square. So I will link that in the description below so that you can look at it. I will also link my half square triangle tutorial, how to make the 2 at a time half square triangles, and how to make those 4 patches. I have several videos out that already walk you through those different ones, so I will link them in the description box below. Once I get all the pieces together, I have my half square triangles done, I have my 4 patches done. I then like to put together my stars one at a time. I'll divide up my half square triangles so that I don't have any 2 matching ones in each pile, so I'll lay them out into 12 different piles, and then add a 4 patch to them and the corner blocks, and then I am ready to sew my pieces together. At that point, I will just do one of the stars at a time. I like to put it together, see how it looks, lay it out like you saw in my video, and then move on to the next block. So when you're done, you should have 12 of them. We have 12 stars in our quilt. You should have 12 small scrappy stars, and this is what you're working on this week. If you don't get it done this week, that's no big deal. Next week I will come out, show you how to do 8 at a time half square triangles and put our larger stars together, And then our fourth week, we are just going to put that whole quilt top together and you will have a quilt. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments section below. Make sure you like and subscribe so you can get it in your inbox, and I will see you next week. Happy sewing!